Everybody, welcome back to another Castos webinar. Today, it's about getting started with Castos. If you want to host your podcast with Castos, you're a new podcaster, you're starting a podcast for the first time, you're in the right place. That's what we're going to cover today. Again, getting started with Castos. If you're looking to get started with Castos and WordPress, that's a different webinar. A lot of the same sort of methodology does apply to getting started with WordPress, but we won't cover that in depth in today's episode. If you have any questions for me as I go along, please feel free to drop them into chat, and we'll get those answered towards the end. And if you have any questions on signing up for Castos, you can go to castos.com to start your 14-day free trial, which we'll look at here today, or email us hello@castos.com. And lastly, if you just want us to do it for you, if this stuff is too daunting, too technical, too complex, or you just want to save a few hours out of your time, you can get an express launch package here at Castos. Go to our services section and sign up for the express launch service. Okay, let's dive in. Let's start that 14-day free trial. No credit card required. Say Matt. Put in your email address and a password, and then agree to our terms of service. You can also sign up with one click by using any of these social outlets: Twitter, Facebook, your Google account, or your LinkedIn account. Okay, so I got my name, email address, and we're headed in to set up Castos for the very first time. As I mentioned at the top of the webinar, we're going to be focusing on creating a new podcast from scratch. You could import your existing podcast from another provider if you want by going this path, or connecting to WordPress going this path. Again, we're only going to focus on creating a new podcast from scratch today. Okay, let's go ahead and hit continue with creating a new podcast. And the first step is filling out the title and the description. So we want to title our podcast and we want to give it a description. This stuff can change later on. Lots of folks ask about SEO and keywords. There's no SEO magic that you're going to do. And in fact, if you put too many keywords, Apple, Spotify, Google will just see that and probably not give it as much ranking power as just a well thought out original title. Unfortunately for me, I'm not going to think of an original title. I'm just going to say Matt's Amazing Podcast. And that could work too, if that's what you want to name it. And description would be a fun-filled podcast series on getting started with podcasting. The description can be as short or as long as you want. The idea is to make it as compelling as possible. When somebody reads it, they know what they're going to get. If you do our Express Launch package, that's some of the promotion and marketing stuff we'll chat about in a half-hour session. It's really about compelling somebody to click and listen to your show. The biggest way to grow a podcast is word of mouth. So if somebody is searching for your show, they heard about Matt's Amazing Podcast, maybe they don't really remember what the title was, they start clicking around. If they can read the description, that'll be that aha moment. Okay, yeah, this is the one that my friend told me about, and this is the one that I want to listen to. So title, description, we'll go next. The most technical thing that one has to do, aside from uploading an episode, is creating podcast cover art. All of the requirements are here on the right-hand side. It must be an exact square. It can't even be off by 1 pixel, or else the platforms will reject it. The type must be PNG or JPEG. Maximum 1 megabyte, 1400 by 1400 pixels, and 3000 by 3000 pixels large. This is a pretty large one that I'm going to upload. I didn't optimize it, so we're just going to throw a warning that it gets to 2.2 megabytes. There's not a basically the platforms will just say that it'll load a little bit slower. It's if you uploaded a 10 megabyte file, that's one thing. 2 megabytes might be fairly standard. This is just a quick podcast cover art that I made from Canva. You can use other platforms or photo editing apps to shrink down the file size. Let's go next. Claim your Castos website URL. Says this subdomain is available by default. Everyone gets a free Castos website. It will be first configured in a subdomain, so mattsamazingpodcast.castos.com. You can then attach a domain to a custom domain to this in the future. You can do that later. You can register your domain somewhere else, but by default, everyone gets a free website, which we'll take a look at in a moment, and it'll be attached to a subdomain. Okay, we'll go next. Categories, primary category and a subcategory. These are all categories that were created from many years ago, generally from supporting Apple at the time. But you want to pick your category that most corresponds with your podcast, and then a subcategory. Again, these are things that can be changed later on in the future. It is made for enhancing search on Apple, Google, and Spotify. It's not super important. A lot of people sweat over this detail. If you were to go into your Apple Podcast app and go into a particular category, they only list the top 250 shows of a category. Chances are you're not coming out of the gate and busting into the top 250 spots of any of the categories. But just from an organization standpoint, you want to pick the one that corresponds the most. Okay, let's go on to the next step. The last step here is a summary. It's going to just summarize everything that we've selected so far and some other things that we haven't, like the language and the explicit factor. You can change that here if you'd like and edit it right away. Otherwise, we go right into creating the podcast. All right, so Matt's Amazing Podcast has been created. I have two options. I can add my first episode or go to the dashboard. We're going to go to the dashboard because I just want to show you sort of what's happening from the account level. So we'll go to the dashboard. And here we are at our main view of the Castos dashboard. This will list all of the individual podcasts that you create here at Castos. Not the episodes, but all of the original podcasts that you've created. And then you can go into the episodes as you see here. But this will give you that bird's eye view of everything that you might want to configure with your podcast and with your account. Let's go into Matt's Amazing Podcast. We'll just click once onto the title. You can see there's no episodes here. I can upload my episodes, or we can go ahead and go through the checklist in order to fill out all of the things that we need to do. You can see that we've actually done everything that we need to do to create a valid podcast feed on the right-hand side. 8 major steps, 6 of 8 have been completed. And then the last 2 would be to 1, upload the episode, and 2, at minimum, submit to Spotify. And we say Spotify because Spotify is the only one that really makes it easy for us to one-click submit to Spotify. You don't have to. If you go to Apple or Google, you do have to have accounts already created on Apple and Google, which are free. We won't cover that in this episode, or in this webinar, but you can also choose to do that. Spotify just gives us that one-click ability. So let's just go ahead and upload an episode so you can see that process. So we'll click on New Episode. Say Episode 1. This is Matt's first episode. And the description of your show is obviously very important. This is where you would put in your text summary of the show, links to any call to actions, links to any resources, all of that fun stuff goes into this description area. If you were to do things like, let's say 0030, that'd be 30 seconds, we'd say chapter 1. And then we say 0340, chapter 2. If you were to type out like timestamps like this, which is very similar to a YouTube, there are podcast apps that will see that in the description, and people could use that as clickable timestamps to skip ahead in the audio. That's not Podcast 2.0 chapters, but they are timestamps that some apps support that you could click through. Okay, we'll upload the media file, which is the podcast episode. Give that a second to upload. You can turn automatic transcripts on. So we do have the ability to automatically transcribe these episodes for you for 10 cents a minute. We'll automatically transcribe them, and then the transcription will go in this box here. If you have your own transcript, you can copy paste it into this box. This transcript field will show up on your free Castos website. I'll show you that in a moment. And the rest of the stuff is fairly straightforward, fairly self-explanatory. Keywords, you might say things like business, revenue, marketing. Series is the first series. Episode is episode 1. These are not important to fill out. They don't need to be filled out for every episode. It's really a legacy setting from the old days of podcasting. We still make them available to you. You can put stuff in series and in episodes in Apple, but it's really largely for Apple. Other platforms may or may not support this stuff in the future. Episode type, for most folks, it's a full episode. If it's your first episode and it's just a trailer, you can highlight that, or you can highlight it as a bonus episode. And again, it doesn't really matter if you check this or not. It'll still publish. It'll still show up in everybody's feeds. Some podcast apps and directories will actually indicate if it's a trailer or a bonus episode. And then your episode image. Again, you don't need to do it for every episode, but you can upload an image that is specific to this podcast episode. Otherwise, it will just default to use your default cover art for your podcast. And then we'd set your time zone. I am in New York, so let's just find that. Boom. Update the account info. And you can schedule your episodes to go out on a certain day and a certain time, or save it as draft. I'm just going to go ahead and hit publish episode. And that's it. It says episode added at the top. Here's my first episode right here. You can see we only have one item left to do, and that is to submit to Spotify. Let's go ahead and click that. I'm not going to submit it. Well, I can't because I'm in a trial. You have to be on a paid plan to submit it to Spotify. But we'll take a look at the places that you can submit later. But that's literally all you have to do to get your first podcast off the ground and published here at Castos. You fill out your podcast RSS details, which you saw at the beginning of the webinar. Really easy, brought us all the way up to the point of publishing our first episode. If you already have your first episode recorded, you can upload it, and then all you have to do is send it out to the world. Let's take a look at the distribution settings. This is the most important part when you go out to create your directory accounts. They're all going to ask for your podcast RSS feed, and that's listed right here. That's what we created by uploading our first episode. It finalized the ability for the podcast RSS feed to be made, and then you could take it out and send it to Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple, Stitcher, Google Podcast. These are the places that will require accounts. We show you how to do that through our knowledge base on how to set up the Connect account, log in, drop in your feed, all of that stuff. The accounts are free. You just have to spend the time setting them up. And again, Amazon and Spotify, you can one-click right from Castos. If you're on our growth plan, which is the middle plan at Castos, you can automatically republish to YouTube as well. Under the player section, you can change the look and feel of your podcast player. By default, it's in the dark mode. You can click on the light mode, and that'll change it to just a lighter version of the player. And you can always copy-paste the player into your own website. Okay. Speaking of websites, the next thing that most people are interested in setting up is the Castos website. You have 3 themes that you can choose from here at Castos. You can preview them by clicking on the preview buttons. It'll load up just a sort of sample viewing of that theme, whichever one you're looking at. So we'll take a look at these really quick. Super simple previews of them. I'm going to select POA, the last one there. And I'm going to leave that default. I'm going to change the color to maybe a little bit closer to that, to our purple. I should know our color code off the top of my head. I don't. That's the closest. And I'm going to leave the heading and the body copy default, but you can change some of the fonts if you want to change up the look and feel and upload your own hero image to sit in the background. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to hit save. And now we'll visit our website so we can see what it looks like. So there is Matt's Amazing Podcast, and this is the hero image in the background. It's just the default one right here. And then once we get all of this stuff set up, like navigation links, social links, subscribe links, like Spotify, Apple, you'd get your link and you'd paste it right into these areas so that it shows up. Social sharing, this is for sharing on social media. This is kind of advanced mode for some, but if you're really into like SEO and making sure that your open graph description and your open graph image are the same across all social media platforms, you can define that right here. If you want to use Google Analytics, you can do that. And if you want to insert that custom domain name, like we have audiencepodcast.fm for our show, you can put in that podcast domain name here. So if I go to podcast.fm, you can see it just loads one of our themes for our audience podcast. Okay. So that's setting up the website, and that'll get you off and running to start to promote and get folks to get to your podcast, get your show submitted, all of that fun stuff will go, and people start being able to access your podcast. It's really, that easy. It might be a little technical once you start getting into the website stuff, but you can play with that and set it up to see how, however you want to. Click to add a host. I won't go through all of that for interest of time, but if you want to fill out your host profile, name, bio, a picture of yourself, your other social media links, that'll show up just like on our audience, myself and for Stuart. We click on Stuart, it'll just bring to this little bio section of the website. So it just fills out this information. This information is also sent out through the podcast feed. So anyone or any podcast app that actually displays this information, it'll show up there, or any other podcast directory that pulls in the host's information will also show up. Will show up there as well. So you can fill out that host section. It's not a requirement, but it's certainly a nice to have. So that's getting started with Castos. We created the feed. We uploaded our first episode. I showed you where to go so that you could submit to different directories. And then we looked at building out the Castos podcast website. You can turn on those automatic transcripts if you'd like. You can start selling access to a private or subscription podcast right through here. Start building out some revenue for your shows, premium content, behind-the-scenes content. Maybe you're doing a membership audio. You can set that up right through Castos. It's a great way to get paid and make some money as a podcaster. And any of the settings that you want to change later on, like the podcast title, the description, the cover image, that's all under the settings tab. This is everything we set up at the start of this webinar and setting up your podcast feed. So pretty fast, pretty easy. Podcast 2.0 support or funding support. If you have like a buy me a coffee or soon a donation and tip jar here at Castos, you can drop that right in here. Fun stuff. And then as you start to grow out your show, share it and send it out to the world, your analytics will start to fill in with your listeners, where they're from, what devices they're using. And then it's fun to be a podcaster at that point as you start uploading more episodes. That's it for now. We'll take some questions. If you have them, drop them in the chat. We'll get them answered for you. Otherwise, we look forward to having you start as a Castos customer. If you have any questions for us, send us your questions at hello@castos.com, and we'll get them answered for you as soon as possible. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for attending today, And looking forward to answering your questions and seeing you in the next webinar.